Hi, I'm Eric Spenceley with Spenceley Design Co. We just moved into a new shop, so today I'm going to show you guys how I made these DIY garage shelves, all for about $40 with basic lumber from your local home center. Let's check it out. We started off the project by heading to our local home center. Now this was going to be a really short trip because we only had two things to grab. One sheet of OSB plywood and a couple 2x4s. Now you could use whatever sheet goods that you want, but honestly we just picked OSB because it's the cheapest thing they have. Make sure that when you pick out your 2x4s, they don't have any bow, bend, or twist in them. Now when buying a 4x8 sheet of plywood, most home centers will actually break down the wood for you. Ours won't, so we have to do it out in the parking lot in order to get it home. We first threw a couple pieces of polystyrene foam insulation down to make sure our saw blade did not hit the ground. We then measured our shelf width of 16 inches wide and used our Craig rip cut paired with our cordless circular saw to trim down all the pieces that we need for the shelves. We then loaded everything up in our pickup truck and we were headed home to start the build.
Well, it's a little stuffed in here, but we'll make it work.
When we got home, we installed an extension fence on our miter saw by using a couple screws in the holes provided in the back of the miter saw fence. This will allow us to easily set up a stop block so that we can make repeated cuts very quickly and easily. If you want to check out the free cut list for this project, check out the link in the description below or head over to SpenceleyDesignCo.com. Once we had the stop block set up on our miter saw, we were ready to start cutting down the pieces of 2x4. Now if you don't have a miter saw, you can cut all of your pieces using a circular saw on the ground. With the 2x4s cut down to length, we were now ready to start the assembly of the shelves. Now our design is going to have two longer shelves paired with two shorter shelves, so we started off by making the two longer shelves using two full stud length 2x4s and a couple of the shorter pieces to attach them together. For the screws on this project, we're using 3-inch construction screws. Now one of the tips we have is to always spend the extra money to get the star drive screws because they almost never strip and you can drive them so much faster and easier. It's definitely worth the extra money. And to make our shorter shelves, we just cut a 2x4 in half and followed the exact same steps. And if you want to learn more about all the tools that we're using, check out the links in the description below. Now you can cut this longer piece down on the miter saw, but I actually find it easier to do it on the floor using the circular saw. Just use a tape measure to measure your line and then use a circular saw and a speed square to cut the 2x4. After we finished the rest of the construction, we ended up with two larger shelves and two smaller shelves. And before we were able to install these on the wall, we had to jump back over on the miter saw to cut down two uprights. We started the final assembly by first measuring how high up we wanted our large shelf. We then transferred that measurement to our uprights and started to attach the shelves to the uprights. Don't forget to use a speed square to make sure that all of your pieces are going on perfectly square. We then used one of our large shelves as a spacer to figure out how far over our shelves needed to go on the wall. We then cut a couple of scrap pieces to use as spacers so we could figure out how far up the next shelf needs to go. We then grabbed our first large shelf and wedged it between the uprights in the wall using the spacers to get proper height. We then attached one end of the shelf to the wall and put a level on it so that we could use it as a pivot to level out the shelf to make sure that it was completely parallel with the floor. Now sometimes we had to use a hammer to help convince these pieces to go into place. We then continued the process of using the level and driving screws in to make sure that the shelves were completely parallel with the floor. We then started to add our third shelf by using the spacer blocks to make sure that the shelves were spaced appropriately. We used the same method of using the level to make sure that everything was parallel. One tip that we have here is to use a clamp to hold the shelf perfectly level while you screw in the shelf. We then install our fourth and final shelf to the top using the exact same techniques we used before, where we would level, clamp, and then screw the shelf into the supporting studs. One other tip we wanted to show you is that some impact drivers and drills actually have magnetic attachments for them to hold all the screws on them while you're working on the project. And after attaching the fourth and final shelf, the main skeleton was done and we were ready to add the plywood paneling to make up the body of the shelf. Now it probably seems like I had this really well planned out. Well, just check this out. This ended up not being a big deal because we had to cut the other two shelves in half anyway. We then laid the plywood down on the floor using the foam insulation that we had used before. We then used our cordless circular saw and speed square to make a perfectly straight cut across the plywood. We started by placing one of the smaller sheets of plywood on the shelves and screwing it in to hold it in place. We then attached the plywood to the second, third, and fourth shelf, and this project was completely done.